going to start the right. Good morning, everyone. Mark Thomas here from the Newmarket Business Association. Thank you for joining us this morning for the fourth in our Battle for Auckland series, and this morning with Efeso Collins. And I'm informed by a source that actually today is your birthday. So happy birthday, Efeso. I'll hand over to my colleague in Parnell, Cheryl Adamson, to do some introductions, and then we'll get underway.
Morning, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of the Newmarket, Parnell, Ponsonby, K Road and Uptown Business Associations. Also welcome to members of the media. Thanks so much for making time. You've attended all of our sessions, and Mark will introduce you all later after Efeso has spoken. In terms of the format, Mark is the CEO of the Newmarket Business Association, and he's going to moderate the session. So as he mentioned, if you weren't listening, please can you ask to have your mics off, and we'll take questions at the end. The upcoming election obviously has huge impact for us. It has impact for our businesses. It has impact for ourselves as business association. And our relationship to council is pretty crucial to empowering our businesses and securing economic prosperity for the future. And, as Mark said, this is the fourth in the series, and we've had some very different approaches to the upcoming mayoralty. So it now gives me great pleasure to introduce Efeso Collins. Fa'anana Efeso Collins grew up in South Auckland, attended Tangaroa College, and went on to study at the University of Auckland, from where he obtained a Bachelor of Arts and Masters in Education. While at uni, he was president of the Students' Association. He went on to work in education, helping to promote tertiary education for students in low decile schools, and spent some stints overseas, including the UK. He has owned businesses, including an education consultancy that he currently still owns, and also has experience working in the public sector. He was chairperson of the Otara Papatoetoe local board, and since 2016, he has served as councillor for the Manukau ward. He announced in January his intention to stand for the Auckland mayoralty. Efeso says at the core of his campaign are his family, in particular his wife Fia and two daughters, Asalemo and Caparelia. So over to you, Efeso.
Thank you very much, Cheryl and Mark, and thank you for that warm introduction. Tēnei te mihi ki a koutou katoa e ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā rangatira, e ngā hauewha. Tēnā koutou, mihia mai tātou katoa. Thank you very much for the opportunity to meet with you all this morning. I think I've got about 5 or 7 minutes to speak to you. So if I get a bit long-winded, Mark, just wave out and I'll bring it to an end. As has already been said, I first got involved in local government back in 2013 when I was elected to the Otara Papatoetoe local board. It was the first time I'd taken part in local government. Up until then, I'd been lecturing at Laidlaw College and doing some work at the university, and was encouraged by friends to really get involved in local community activity. I was elected in 2013, and in the same year became chair of the local board. So I had a lot to learn. There was much to understand, and really enjoyed those first 3 years in local government. It's given me the experience now that I've been in local government for almost 9 years, so 3 terms all up, that I've come to the point where I believe I'm ready now to lead the city and to lead Auckland Council as we're challenged, given the COVID period we've just had, as we reunite, come together, reconnect with people. I'm running a campaign that's based on care, collaboration, and courage. I think it's important that we work with people around the table and ensure that people know that we're committed to a particular vision. I think we're going to need some courageous leadership so that we can take a strong sense of advocacy, especially with our financial situation, to Wellington, and make sure that we represent ourselves well overseas as our borders are opening again, and ensure and encourage people are coming back into Auckland, the gateway to our nation, so that they can see how great our country is and enjoy and spend and maybe even choose to invest or live here. And I think that's really important. And care, because I think there's, in local government politics and politics in general, I think there are layers of anger and frustration. And I think a mayor who will care for people, who'll be out and listen to what their concerns, challenges and aspirations are for the city, is going to be the kind of leadership that Tāmaki Makaurau Auckland is calling on, especially over this next period. So I want to be an advocate to Wellington, a cheerleader for Auckland and cheerleading many of the projects that people are keen on, but also a leader, someone who will listen and in listening to people learn from what they want and lead the city as a result of that. And I've had the pleasure over the last couple of months to get around the city, and I'm enjoying it. And earlier today, as people were coming on to the Zoom, I was talking about some of the challenges of just how big our city is, going from one day a meeting that I started the day in Mayoral and ended the day in Orewa, to show the real breadth and width of our city. And it's important that we've got a mayor who's out there meeting all parts of the city, not just focus on one particular part of the city, but getting out to all parts of the city so that they understand, so that I understand what the issues are that people would really like to speak to me about. There are some key areas that I'll be focusing on in this campaign, and happy to talk some more and elucidate further on some of those areas when I get the opportunity to speak with people and answer some questions. Some of you will know that I've already announced a fares-free public transport policy. And I believe that if we look at the Helen Clark Foundation report, we know that for some parts of our community, almost 30% of their income is spent on transport. And it's my belief that if we get rid of the impediment of price and allow people to move freely on the bus, the train, that it's going to decongest our roads, and it's going to ensure that people are meeting some of our climate ambitions, which is to get out of their cars and move freely on public transport. We know that there's cases of fare-free public transport in cities like Kansas City, Tallinn, and Lisbon. And so we've got a case for why we should be thinking about this, and it would be my ambition to achieve fare-free public transport. I also think it helps us because it starts to decongest our road. You will know the figures of close to 2 billion, depending on which report you're reading. There's $1.2 billion of lost productivity, up to some people saying $2 billion of lost productivity. We'll get that productivity back when we decongest our roads and we make sure that people, as we pivot, understanding that people are working maybe 1 or 2 days at home and 2 or 3 days in the office, that as we understand how that those pivot working conditions are for people, that's going to be part of the adjustment that we all need to make, that's going to decongest our roads. And I also think it's important that we take an equity focus, and that's what I believe fare-free public transport is doing. It's ensuring that there's equity across the board for all parts of Auckland. I'm also interested in housing. At the moment, I'm the liaison councillor for Eke Pānuku Development Auckland, which is the urban regeneration arm of council. And my desire is to see that as we unlock, as we support, and as we transform parts of the city, that people will understand that we are a set of communities within the big Tāmaki Makaurau Auckland city. And that means that we've got to encourage regeneration in parts of Auckland, like Henderson, Newland, Manukau, Northcote, Albany. Those are the areas where people, as we pivot and as we adjust the way we work, those are kind of going to be the smaller centres within the large city. And so we've got to do what we can to ensure that when people come to the city, when they're committed to working here, schooling here, investing here, that they're going to have somewhere to stay. And I think we've got to work really solidly alongside the Crown to ensure that we've got good intensification, good housing, and good availability of housing for workers. And workers are really important because we know that many teachers, police officers, social workers are really challenged because housing is so expensive. If you're renting, you often feel like you don't have many rights. And if you aren't on the home ownership ladder yet, then that's going to be a challenge for you. And I think council's got a pivotal role in ensuring that we're working alongside the Crown and uplifting the numbers of houses we've got. I've got 2 more things. I just want to talk about community facilities. And I think as we reconnect with people coming out of COVID, our community facilities are essential for the way in which Aucklanders interact with one another. Our libraries are often talked about. People go in there not just to read, but to connect. You can have a coffee outside, you can see people, you'll be reading. But for young people in particular, we know we've got some youth libraries in parts of Auckland where young people are really engaged with libraries, and it's lifting numeracy and literacy levels. So when people are connecting, when we've got good community hubs and council's got that part to play in enabling community interaction, then our community facilities are essential for part of the new Auckland. not only are they essential for part of the new Auckland, what it does do as well is it allows people the opportunity to have somewhere to go. I've got 2 young children, as was noted in my introduction, and it allows us to go to the library where you can have things like mainly music, where the kids can enjoy themselves and parents will meet up and they can have some downtime as well while the kids are having a whole lot of fun, sometimes wrecking the library and having lots of toys go everywhere. But that's great for our children, and it's great for Auckland because we're a city that wants the ability to raise families. That's the kind of city we want. And I think it's important that our community facilities are up to scratch, they're well used, and they need to be multi-purpose. And that's something that we've got to take a careful look at. And just finally, I wanted to touch on the issue of local economic development. One of the things I learned a lot when I was chair of the local board was how we worked with bids and how we worked with local business associations. When we were, our approach at the local board, which has changed over time, but when I was chair of the local board, our bids, given our budget, we were able to match for every dollar they collected through their targeted rate, we matched them $1. So we weren't just giving the extra that a number of councils came out with their bids were getting an extra $30,000. And I'm not sure what the support level was for the bids that are on this call today, but that's what we were doing for groups like Otara Mangere, Old Papatoetoe, Hunters Corner, and it allowed the bids to really be able to market themselves, to support themselves. We had a whole lot of CCTV at the time that was going in. We had good community development and support going in, and that was allowed because the local board was able to support them. And that level of support has come down as the bids have gotten stronger and they've been able to use their own finances to achieve what they want to do. Then the local board funding has adjusted accordingly. And I think that's been a wonderful approach because our bids, given we don't want just $2 shops at a number of bids, and you'll understand this, it means that we can really develop these bids so that those people who are coming through, we've got high foot traffic and we've got businesses that feel like, yeah, they understand the community and we're giving the community a chance to really engage with commercial activity. And then when we think about intensification, we're thinking about who's living near these town centres. And Eke Panuku has just released a paper on town centre regeneration. I think that's important. We've got people who live close as well as people who come from afar, and we need a way in which we're going to attract people into local business. So I thought I'd just touch on those areas. I'm not sure how my time is going, Mark, but
you're good. You're pretty much back to the end, I'm afraid. That's a good run.
Okay.
And I must say,
Cool.
I really look forward to Richard Northey from the Waitemata local board matching our big targeted rate $1. We could do with another $1.8 million. Would be fabulous. And now moving on to the next stage of the call, where we moved over to our media panel. And joining us this morning, we have Simon Wilson from the Herald, Todd Nile from Stuff, and Patrick Smelly from Business Desk. I don't think Mark Jennings has been able to join us this morning from Newsroom, but he might jump on at some stage. So we'll start off again with Simon, and 4 to 5 minutes-ish. And just so people don't sort of freak out about the timings, they're a little bit fluid because sometimes some of the conversation pieces are part of the questions we've got from our members as well. So it's roughly 4 or 5 minutes each. And I will use my timer, a bit more disciplined this week. But Simon, we'll start off with you.
Thank you. Hello, Efeso.
title for Simon.
Efeso, you've been a 2-term councillor, chair of the local board, as you've told us. In that time, I've known you for a while, and I've known you to be a bit ambitious and to be thinking about the mayoralty for a while. It's a period in office when it might have been expected that you would build close working relationships with officials, with the mayor, with other councillors. Yeah, not only for the experience, but also for the working relationships that would allow you to be an effective mayor. But you're not a committee chair. It is hard to see how you have built those relationships, and I'm wondering why you do not have a stronger setup with other councillors, with the officials. I'm wondering why you're so much on the outer.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting perspective, Simon, in that I think I've worked really collaboratively with people. And whilst I might not be a committee chair, I was the deputy chair of the Community Development and Safety Committee, which was chaired by Councillor Casey in the last term. And that was a committee of council that reported into the now PACE committee. So I think I have been given the opportunities to express my leadership vision my approach to leadership, and that's been good. And as I said earlier, I was chair of the local board, so I came into council with what I thought were really good relationships with people who understood my approach, and the fact that I was chair of the local board after being voted in for the first time shows that there is leadership quality there. I think what's really important though is how we work in the system. And while some people might look through the lens of this is the natural progression, my desire has been to understand council, to work out where I believe some of the gaps may have been. And people will know that I voted against the regional fuel tax, which upset a whole lot of people. But I think what it showed was I'm prepared to work with people. I'm also prepared to take a personal stand on issues that I believe are relevant for my community. And I think if you look at the community that I represent, I'm currently voted in by the people of Manukau. I have every confidence that they believe they've been well advocated for, that I've spoken up on their behalf. And if you look at the COVID work that I did, I was always representing the community of Manukau for what was happening in COVID. So I think I've been a staunch advocate for the people of Manukau.
If you do become mayor, how are you going to go about developing those relationships? Which councillors have you got working relationships with that you would expect to see them promoted into your key team?
Oh, I've got good relationships with all the councillors, and bar two, I've been around to each and every one of them at the moment, and with two more to come, where I've gone out and told everyone, hey, look, I'm running for the mayoralty, and it'd be good to sit down and have an honest chat with people. I've been enjoying those coffees, and people have been very honest with me. They've told me the things that they're ambitious for their own communities, but also things where we may have disagreed on issues previously. I won't say who in particular, who I think would be part of a good team, but you'll know that I made clear intentions of working with people across political divide and with different ideas by choosing to sit next to Desley Simpson, who represents the wealthiest ward in the city, and I represent the poorest ward in the city. And the reason I did that, which has been reported on, is because I wanted to understand how do people in our communities view the world. But alongside us, people like Richard Hills, who chairs the climate committee, he represents North Shore. I sit close to Shane Henderson. On the other side, I'm sitting next to John Watson. So there's people everywhere. I've been working closely as well with Josephine Bartley during the COVID times. So I'm naming people, but these aren't people I'm trying to suggest are going to be part of the leadership team. But what it does show is that there are people there with interest in how we are going to develop the new leadership for Auckland Council, because whatever happens, come October the 8th, we're going to get a new mayor because Phil's retiring, and we're going to get a new deputy mayor as well, and that Bill Cashmore is retiring.
Your free fares policy, where will the money come from for that?
Yeah, we're about to release a paper. We've got an academic in London at the moment who's looking into those cities that I mentioned and working out how that would form a policy case for us. But I'm convinced that there's money currently in our budgets that we can move around. And it's been estimated anywhere between 175 through to 300 million to be able to achieve fares-free public transport. And I think that can be done. There's been a number of budgets that's already been out in the media.
So it would come out of existing council funds?
That's correct. Yes, it would.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Simon. Moving on, I see Mark Jennings has actually joined us, which is fabulous. Good morning, Mark. We'll move on now to Todd Nile.
Morning, Efeso, and if it's true, happy birthday.
Thank you, Todd.
So 2 questions. The first one is, you've made it clear the style of mayor that you would be, relationship builder, collaborative, and so on. But I don't have a sense yet what the end result of that will be, other than, perhaps fare-free public transport. How will the courage show up in what you would achieve? Will you be accelerating climate change action? Are you going to be a 5% mayor, getting more money in to do more? What will be the result of your style?
So the result of my style will be, I've said that this is the politics of listening, it's the politics of learning, and then it becomes the politics and the activities of leading. And yeah, I think we've got major issues when it comes to climate change. I've spoken on these things. I'm Samoan. I was born in New Zealand, but my parents are Samoan. And we know that it's the Pacific that are going to face the immediate results of climate change because of the sea level rises. So I think we're going to see all of that. But as I listen, as I learn from people, as I get soundings from them as to what they're ambitious about. Then I can lead in policy. And we haven't developed a lot of policy. I don't think many of the candidates have developed policy, but the reason why I'm taking my time before we make policy announcements is to get around as far and wide as possible so that people know that I'm interested in their ideas. One of the approaches that we're taking in our campaign is a ground up approach. We're inviting all our volunteers, not just to come in and say, cool, let's go talk about Efeso and let's go hand out your leaflets and door knock. That's going to be part of it. But another serious component that we're asking for is their strategic nous too, is how do we thresh out ideas around policy so that when I come out with the final announcement, people feel like they've been engaged, and that's where I think this will make a difference. So you can expect over time that we'll be making more formal commitments. We're looking at a whole series of levers at the moment when it comes to council finances. I'm very aware of the challenges that we have, but those are discussions to be had, but I will be very clear on where I stand on those issues.
You touched on economic development. One of the possibly the biggest ambitions or biggest bids that Auckland has made was the $60 million bid for the Eco Park in Manukau in West Auckland, which missed the cut in this year's government budget. What role did you have in that, and what role would you have in trying to get that one across the line again?
Yeah, we obviously led by committee chairs and the leadership of council, and my role in that was to ensure that they heard our voices. Obviously, for something to be so good for Manukau, I would have been there as the local representative, pushing from behind, pushing from the side, and I worked alongside our Filipino to make sure that our views were heard clearly. There are a number of projects that haven't got over the line that we've been really disappointed with. I have to remind people that I'm also currently the member for Manukau, and so as we drive and advocate for those policies, we're also aware that we've got to act regionally in the interests of what's good for the Auckland region. Disappointed that it didn't get over the line with this particular budget, but that doesn't mean we stop advocating for it. And I think what we need now is continual push. If climate change, if we're going to be ambitious about how we want to do better when it comes to climate, then it means that, and the Eco Park was part of it, we need to understand that's important. We persistently advocate. And I think part of our challenge starts to lean into the way in which local government is funded, which I'm not satisfied with. We'll come out with a position on how we finance things in some time, but that's part of the discussion we need to have with Wellington. Is Wellington just can't take 93% of the public money and leave local government, especially Auckland, to survive on 7% of that finance.
1 minute, Todd.
Just a really quick one. You've talked about getting people's ideas in. When will we have a clear raft of policy from you, across a reasonably broad area?
Yeah, look, our intention is to really start developing the policy by mid-June, so that by the end of June we've got some much more clearer ideas of where we're heading. Nominations for the mayoralty for any candidate don't open until mid-July, and sometimes I wonder if everyone else is more excited about policy but not giving us the opportunity to really get out and hear people. So look, I understand that people want announcements, and that's part of the drill for an election, but I'm hoping that come early July, be really clear and we'll be able to launch a series of policies. We've got general ideas and commitments. People will know where I stand generally on things, but let's give ourselves that time to make sure that our policy is foolproof and that we've checked out the numbers. The last thing I would want is to say we're going to do all these things, and then people say, well, that equates to a certain percentage rates rise, which another candidate has represented on my behalf, which is completely untrue.
Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Patrick, over to you.
Talofa Efeso. I'm a Wellingtonian who drove from the Auckland airport into the city last night and thought, yeah, things are back to normal. I always felt nostalgic sitting in a traffic jam. I guess my first question is whether even though the light rail project would take Aucklanders as far as Mangere, and that's probably more important than getting to the airport, there's an awful lot more of South Auckland and people who need to be able to get to work from South Auckland than Mangere. Why is light rail the right answer when there are a bunch of other answers which would be cheaper and might be able to get to better parts of the city, to other parts of the city where people need what you're proposing?
Yeah, I definitely support what we've got at the moment. We know that the government is coming in with most of the finance to be able to sort out Britomart through to the airport. But Patrick, I think at the end of the day, what we've got to do is understand who we can work with. And I think light rail, I think above ground was my personal preference. I think it would save us a lot of money. But if the Crown are heading in that direction, that's what the independent group who worked with the Crown say is the best option to take. Then we've got to somehow not follow suit, but work with them so that it's the best available. Look, there's a number of things that we could do out south that really need some attention. We've got the Manukau spur. If you're coming in from Papakura, you have to get off at Puinui rather than go into Manukau. So it feels like it's wasted there. We know that we could probably, if with some support, working with Mana Whenua, we could probably get light rail right through to the airport, and then we could encourage it through from Manukau heading out to Botany and to East Auckland. So there's a number of projects out south that can be done, but for me, the position of fares free, the impact of or the impediment of price and being able to get people onto the bus or onto the train is foremost in my mind when I'm thinking of the constituents that I'm serving today. And so that's why I think the fares free position is the first place to go. And then we start to work out the reach of the network, because I understand that we've got challenges around the reach of the network, and then frequency. All of us just want to turn up, and we know that you can be confident the bus, the train is going to be there on time. That's what we all want, and that's something that we've got to really work with Auckland Transport to achieve.
Just a quick follow-up on the question I think Simon asked about where does the money come from fares free? So you're not expecting that to come from Waka Kotahi or from central government. Does it mean that, and you think that there's room in the council budget to fund it? What sort of numbers are you talking? Would you have to cut something else, or are you taking the view that a combination of maybe revenues from congestion charging and a slightly larger capacity to borrow because of the way that water care will be off the balance sheet mean that you can actually just borrow to do it?
At the moment, whilst I would consider things like water care coming off the balance sheet, that's not part of my current thinking. My current thinking is I believe that there's enough, whether it's, I've been given really wide estimates of anywhere between 176 million through to 300 million. So we need to settle on what the actual cost is going to be. But those are estimates that I've got from different people at Auckland Transport. So we're clear that that's the kind of cost range. I'm satisfied when I was looking more at around 230 million, which is what I believed it would be, that there's money internally in the current budgets that we have to be able to move around, reprioritize so that we can achieve fare-free public transport. And given that, then there's the added ability, given the things that you've talked about, like with the change in water care and how that will look on balance sheets. But that hasn't been part of my thinking, because when I made that announcement, all I had in front of me was what we do with current budgets.
The final question is, and you've touched on this, Desley Simpson, Remuera, Central Auckland, very wealthy. You represent the poorest part of Auckland. Traditionally, in local government elections, it's home-owning ratepayers who vote. Not enough people vote in local government elections. It's a postal vote. I think a lot of people these days are a bit confused as to where the nearest letterbox is, postal boxes. What are you going to do to make sure that you get your vote out?
It's a complete ground campaign at the moment, Patrick. We know that many of our families who are in poorer communities are very transient. We understand that. I've worked with young people and seen the challenges in school when you've got transient kids. It does absolutely no good for their educational achievement. It becomes underachievement. And a lot of these families are transient and they need a lot of support. So as far as the campaign goes, we're out there all the time. But it's not just reaching those families who might not usually vote. I've made every intention. I've spent a lot of time in East Auckland and in North Auckland over the last few weeks, because I think it's important people hear my story, that they don't just see Efeso. And I think there's been some frame that he's just the guy that speaks for South Auckland. And I think when we're speaking for our most vulnerable, actually, we're speaking for a city that wants to prosper. And so as I get out and meet people from Sunnynock and Devonport and Ordewa, where I've been in Little Manly, I was in Little Manly the other day, then what it means is people get to understand where I'm coming from. They understand my desires for the city. And it means they can be part of, well, there's a really good option here for a candidate for mayor, and maybe I would be someone they would consider. So it's not just about ensuring that we turn out vote, because there's a lot of people saying, just turn out the vote for me. My base is South and West. I want everyone everywhere, whether you live in Central Auckland or North Auckland or East Auckland, to know that I'm proposing myself. I'm putting myself forward, and I'm keen to meet as many people as possible so that they can ask me questions too.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Patrick. And over to you, Mark. You can finish us off with the last set of questions for the media.
Yeah, thanks very much. Talofa Efeso. One of the plays that the other candidates are making is that they are the person to stand up against Wellington, that Auckland is given a raw deal and they're going to take the fight up and really deal to Wellington. You don't seem that sort of guy. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, look, Talofa, Mark, thanks for the question. Look, my style is obviously comes from who I am, and I've been raised. I'm the youngest of 6 children. We were raised to be respectful, but respectful doesn't mean we're not upfront, and respectful doesn't mean we're not robust. And I took on the party that's endorsing me when I voted against the regional fuel tax, and I think that's one way in which we give clear signal indication that we are prepared to take the fight to Wellington. And I really do believe that Auckland has been underserved by the way in which local government is financed. And even in the local government framework review, I was really clear on how unhappy and dissatisfied I was. And so I think it's about talking. I think we've got to make connections first. We've got to ensure that we've got the ear of the ministers in Wellington that we're talking to, and then we go in with a real case. And one of the ideas I have is to set up an Auckland Council office in Wellington. We have a policy. We call it the Auckland Policy Office. When I was a public servant, they had the Auckland Policy Office on Queen Street. Or we need an Auckland Policy, or we need an Auckland Advocacy Office based in Wellington. We should be chasing people all the time. So I have every intention of making sure that we have honest conversations, but honest conversations aren't disrespectful conversations, aren't just look at me, I'm tough and I'm boorish. That's one aspect of leadership. My leadership is to work with people, to be clear and to be honest. And in an interview earlier, I said one of the key tenets for me is truth. And I want people to know that I'm going to be completely upfront with them. This is like my days the few days I played rugby, Mark, was when, you play honestly, you go for it on the field, and then you can have a beer afterwards. And I think that's going to be my approach to Wellington.
What position did you play?
I was a lock. And in those days, Mark, they couldn't, I was sad because in those days you didn't get support from the number 6 or the number 7. You know how they can lift you? In those days you had to jump yourself. So that's what I did.
Yeah. So you would say that you're tough enough for a fight if it comes to it?
Absolutely. And I'm up for the fight. And I think it's really important that that side of us comes out. And I've got that side in me. And I think it's important that people know that is there. I've been, I know you don't have a lot of time, but I've been working in this community for a long time. And there are people, I've often talked about how I'm often told, Efeso, you shouldn't be catching the bus to church. And, it's working through the nuances of culture and the way in which environments are set up so that we can actually have a real impact on people's views.
Thank you. A couple of quick questions as to where you stand on getting rid of parking on main roads. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, so we often talk about arterial roads, and 3% of our roads, this is where the parking strategy that I think you're referring to, over 10 years. I think as long as Auckland Transport is communicating with the locals, then it's something we have to do. We've got to share the limited space we have. I'm in favour of removing them on the basis that Auckland Transport picks up its game and communicates with locals and with local businesses. And there's research that's now suggesting that as we remove the parking, as we encourage more cycling and pedestrian, it actually lifts the level of business that comes through the door. So, but that's a discussion we have to have. And instead we get things reported all over the place, and it really upsets people. But if we take our time and take people on a journey, if I was to say to someone, look, that parking at the front of your store is going to be gone in the next 3 years, then people think, right, I've got something to work towards. Let's have a conversation. That's where I think Auckland Transport have let us down.
Okay, and central government is hell-bent on intensification of housing. If you live in a suburb like, say, Simon and I do, where there is a lot of heritage housing, a lot of villas, a lot of Auckland's, if you like, built history, and the idea of a 3-story block right on your boundary. Are you in favour of this?
Yes, I am. And I'm in favour on the basis that the council consulted with the community. We went back and made a presentation. You're talking about the National Policy Statement, urban development and character homes and the challenges we have. We went and we gave the case of Auckland to the Crown. They said, no, go back and reset it. And we are now taking the steps that we have available to us with our planning department to go out and assess case by case. So we should be calm around that. It's case by case. But it's also understanding that intensification means 2 things in this particular regard. Whose character and whose heritage are we defining here? And is it time to reset what we define as heritage, given the ability to build 3 up, 3 wide means that we're going to increase the number of houses that we have available to people. And if these houses are along good transport lines, if it's close to good amenity, then that's something that we've got to consider as a city. And I think we only polarize ourselves when we get into conversations that are about holding on to this as mine. I think it's time we started to loosen our grip a bit and have more genuine conversations with people.
But if you look at the developers in the city, there's a track record of building just crap buildings. And, you know, you're going to turn part of the city into awful ghetto-y type situation.
Yeah, and my commitment would be, if that kind of development goes ahead, granted this is now, you know, pretty much in legislation, what we've got to do is ensure that our planning and design is good. And no one wants to live in an ugly concrete jungle. We've seen them all over the world. What we can do is have good apartment dwellings like the ones that I live in Otahu. There's a good bit more space, but close to good amenity, and there's a bus outside our apartment every 5 minutes. But that can only happen with good planning, and we have planned poorly over many years in the city. We kind of just spread out and said, yeah, throw houses here, and that's why we can't get buses to half the places in the city. So better planning will give people the assurance that it won't just be ugly, and it will also add to the amenity, add to the character of the city that we have at the moment.
Thanks very much, Efeso.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. So we have a few themes that have come through from the various members across the Central Fringe Business Associations, and one which is particularly topical at the moment, of course, is crime. So Auckland has seen a spike in crime and ram raids, and now shootings, and a lot of shootings going on. But in particular, the government announced yesterday, or Potter Williams announced yesterday, a $6 million package to sort of help 500 businesses, support for defence against ram raids and other sort of robberies and things. I mean, Newmarket alone, we have well in excess of 500 retailers. So the $6 million is a very tokenistic drop in a bucket. We have experienced in the Central Fringe area specifically spikes in all kinds of crime, smashed windows, smash and grabs, ram raids, etc., the whole thing. And although the bids do their very best with the targeted rate funding they've got, which is not a massive amount of money, we're still left short, and we need more support in lots of ways to protect our members and our retail environments. What do you think the council could do better to work alongside our business communities to help improve crime?
Yeah, great question. I really understand and feel for many of the businesses that have been affected by this. Look, I don't personally think that $6 million is enough around the bollard support and that kind of thing, but I'm glad that it's been announced. Where I think the council can have a really good part to play is working alongside bids to see how we can support often the community development safety committees that we have that work alongside bids at the moment. So let's understand how we work together. But can I just come to the preventative measures first and then look at some of the immediate issues that we have in front of me? As you know, I've published research on youth gangs. I've studied them for many years, and I continue to work with youth today. And even the police association have come out and they said, when young men are unloved and unwanted, this is the kind of activity they're going to be exposed to. So when we've got more community constables, I'm a real believer, if we're going to have more police on the beat, then we should focus on getting more community constables into our communities, youth workers, social workers, guidance counsellors. Those people working alongside families, ensuring that they're supported, means that we're going to take their eyes off the immediate grab that ram raids do. So that's the preventative measures. And I think immediately what we need to be doing is working alongside the BID so that we get a really good understanding of what they're feeling at the moment, what they're experiencing. And there'll definitely be people where you kind of know who they are. That's what the community constables show us. We also know that in parts like Newmarket and the central city, because students haven't been here, they've been the houses have been taken up by filled by MSD and HUD. And what I think we need there is good support in those houses. Housing Urban Development do a good thing when they have got people in motels. They have managers there who support and offer the wraparound service. And it's as those families and whānau come into these communities, they're working out where they belong to. And so if we've got good support, it might take some of the heat off where they are. So I think those are a number of issues that we've got to do, but we can't just, I think we've got to be really clear that we've got to stand up. We've got to get the bollards in place. That's one aspect. I know that there's been a call for more CCTV. This is something we've been going through in Old Papatoetoe for years. And what we got was increase the CCTV, we increased bollards in front of stores, but we also got a really strong community development safety group working because that had the police and everyone was talking to each other. And I think those groups make a real difference too.
I think, just to take that a bit further. So for about 2 years now, the central business associations have been hardcore lobbying Wellington. And in particular, actually started with Minister Nash when he was Minister of Police and followed through to Minister Poto Williams for support and help. We realised there was a problem about 2 years ago. So when we see the minister on the news saying they're acting now under urgency because it's kind of a bit ridiculous. And to be fair, I think the Auckland City's response has been very much along the lines of we send our thoughts and prayers, but actually in terms of tangible efforts to support the businesses and to take it to Wellington, we've been left wanting for a very long time. So, I guess what we're looking for is some assurance that we're going to have any future mayor is going to be able to really have the backs of Auckland Central, Auckland West, East and South, and in particular the business owners who have gone through some unprecedented attacks after 2 years of COVID, ropey trade, lack of support in all kinds of ways. And then we've got, cars patrolling Broadway at 2 or 3 in the morning, looking for an opportunity to do a ram raid. And, the minister suggested we can put some bollards up, but actually we really need a bit more than that. So anyway, it's a point of mass frustration. Just a heads up that's something that, the business community really feels, but I won't dwell on that. You've mentioned briefly about Auckland Transport. So at the moment, we have, a bunch of CCOs like Watercare, AT, Panuku, etc., and Auckland Unlimited, and they're largely operated at arm's length from the council. How would you perform or change that? And how would you ensure increased performance of some of them, in brackets, Auckland Transport?
Yeah, look, we'll go to Auckland Transport. They often seem to be the case at every election where people have a level of displeasure, and that's not just people in the community, that's local boards as well. We've got to do better when it comes to communicating with the public. In the CCO review that we undertook some months ago, one thing that came out really clearly was communication so that the expectations into the community were understood, not just pursuing commercial dividend, but also pursuing social dividend. And where I think Auckland Transport has let us down and failed us has been in the ability to communicate with communities, whether it's neat streets, safer streets. What we need to do is take the community with us. The parking strategy, again, another example of that. And all of these things are good. They are good for the long-term future of Auckland. We let ourselves down. We fail the community if we don't communicate. And that's what we need to do. So as Mayor, one thing that I will do is put 2 councillors back on the Auckland Transport Board and make sure that we're closely aligned, and also encourage those councillors and myself as Mayor to look at Section 92 of the Local Government Act, which means that all of what a CCO do, not just AT, but all of what CCOs do are in line with the policies and plans of council. We've got to strengthen that connection so that we're working in tandem, as opposed to, well, they have a board, they answer to that board, and all we do is send them a very nice statement of, or letter of intent. So that's where I think we can do better with the CCOs. We've done a review. We're working through some of the recommendations. We've achieved some of the recommendations of the review, but it's important and key to me that the CCOs know that they are responsible to the people of Auckland. And one idea that I'd have long term is to see some of these CCOs come back in-house. That's just me thinking broadly, but that allows us direct management or direct connection into them if that was to happen. AT, different case because they sit under legislation, so we can't just bring them in-house. But if people believe that they feel separated or segregated from a public entity that belongs to the people of Auckland, then we've got to do everything. I've got to do everything I can as mayor to bring them closer so that people feel like, yeah, now I feel like they're listening to me.
Okay, thank you. In terms of, we've touched briefly on light rail, but what infrastructure projects do you think need to be championed for Auckland in Wellington?
Yeah, so a number for me, so alongside light rail, we've got to make sure that the second harbour crossing is sorted out. And I know that that's for some 15 years ago, that's what's been reported at the moment. Also the light rail or rapid transit right through to the west. We know that in the northwest, there's very little transport going out there. So that's something we've got to focus on. And I know that's been talked about, it's been mooted, but we've really got to make sure that that happens. And I think one thing that I'm really interested in is how we get the smaller buses out. And I know that might not sound that exciting, but if you go to places like Millwater, where I've had meetings with people, or even the communities in Piha, the big 47-seater bus isn't going to get easily in and around those communities. So we've got to look at smaller buses, whether it's the 10, 15, 20-seater. I know that the money, there were local board, they invested or they supported a trial in their area so that it was doing like Golden Circle routes. So that's some of the infrastructure, especially when it comes to transport, that we've got to be looking at. I'd also like to see another, well, maybe not infrastructure, but, you know, we've got to look at what we've got with arts and culture. And at one stage we were looking at the idea of Te Papa South, and that was talked about when I was chair of the local board, and that was having a version of Te Papa in Auckland. Because when people come in here, they've got to be able to go somewhere. And I'd like to see a Te Papa South or a Te Papa West, just so that it pushes people, gets you into the city if you're coming in on a cruise boat, but then you might think, well, I'm going to go check out what life's like out in Henderson or Massey. And I think that's what we need to.
Awesome. Despite COVID and lockdowns, you know, we're having a few speed bumps now economically, and inflation's gone a bit crazy, and it's not looking too flash. But of course, over time, we are assured by various economists that things will get back on track and those mortgages won't go too crazy. Auckland will continue its growth trajectory, and we will become, you know, once again, very desirable. Borders reopen, immigration will start to crank it back up again. How could council better support the growth of the city?
Well, firstly, we could better support ourselves today by getting up to speed with the infrastructure under development that we've had. That's what we're challenged by at the moment, is that there's been so much underinvestment in our infrastructure for so many years that we're playing catch up. So we've got to get to a point where we're even. Given the fact that the plane is flying and we're still adding to the plane, we're going from being, say, an A320 to the big, you know, A380, and that's what this is happening in the air. And so the ways in which we support it is ensure that all of our community facilities, our infrastructure are up to speed, they're future focused and future proofed, so that when we get to the, you know, estimates of 2.4 million people in the next 20 odd years, we're going to be able to work with everyone in the city so that people can get around. They're not all in their cars. We've got more cycling lanes so that people can cycle. We're looking at how we in fact become a council that serves the city. So look, there's a number of things that we could do in that space, and that's one of them. And looking at the way in which we govern, we've got to understand that we're like a state government in comparison to Australia. And so we've got to work out, well, what's the best way to ensure that local government is listening to the community, so that they do have a say into the kind of city that we want. But we've got work to do when it comes to intensification, a modern public transport system. People relying less on their cars and making sure they're on their bikes and walking, and a schooling system. I know this is central government, but we've got to work with the Crown as to where the schools are going, because we can't just keep having bigger and bigger schools. I think what Rangi Toto High School or college is now up to 3,000 people. Avondale College is heading the same way. We've got to get clever in the way in which we intensify our cities, and then how we allow for good schooling in them too. So there's big conversations to have with the Crown.
Awesome. That's it from me. I'll pass it over to my colleague Cheryl from Parnell with any follow-up questions.
Hi, Efeso. Thank you for what you said about supporting bids, and I think your advocacy in that role, especially with small business associations, is very necessary. What I would like to ask is, on behalf of the actual businesses, if you think of the retailers, you think of the hospitality businesses, you think of the small business owners in the city fringe, why should they vote for you? What will you bring to them? Because we know that business typically is pretty disillusioned with local politics.
Oh, thanks, Cheryl. Oh, you'd vote for me because you know you're going to get a mayor who's going to be courageous for our businesses, who's going to ensure that we, as the borders open up, that we strengthen our ties with international groups. We've got sister cities in LA, Guangzhou, in Galway and Ireland. And as we encourage people to come, it's those people who are going to come in and invest and shop and check out your retail, who are going to help lift the businesses. So we're going to, Tātaki Auckland Unlimited, I want to push them to make sure that we've got a Auckland marketing campaign so that we're doing local. I've got ideas of how we advertise or market local so that we're not just pushing out, well, come to Auckland, you get into the central city. That's an important part of who we are. But let's talk about Newmarket. Who do we get coming into Newmarket or Parnell? And can we extend those people and the shoppers and the retailers, the shoppers who are going to come in? So you're going to get that from me, and I'm trying to lift my eyes so that we're extending our base of who's coming into retail. But you can also count on me that we're going to take a strong case to the Crown as to how we support retailers to feel safe. I've seen this happen in Papatoetoe when we were getting ram raids. Back in the day, and so there was a lot of cigarette stealing back in those times, and people taking fizzy drinks. And we got together and we got community development groups together, and it made a difference. I think the other thing that we need to talk about is how the public service work, and especially when it comes to bids, work closer with business associations. And I think there's been a bit of a breakdown in the way in which we communicate with one another and talk to one another that we've got to get right. We've got to open those lines, ensure that people feel strong and safe about coming to talk together, but won't feel left behind. And my charge to the public service will be to make sure that the ethos of public service is foremost when we're supporting local businesses, because we're so reliant on you. We're reliant on you so that when we're in work and looking for that coffee or somewhere to hang out with people, have a drink after work, but we're also reliant on you because you help lift what our community is about. So all of those things are going to be possible under my mayoralty.
Thank you. Nothing more. Thanks, Mark.
Awesome. Well, Efeso, thank you so much for your time this morning. Hope it wasn't too grueling. Thank you very much to our media panel, Simon from the Herald, Todd from staff, Patrick from Business Desk, and Mark from Newsroom. Thank you to my colleagues too, Cheryl from Parnell, Viv and Ponsonby, Brent in Uptown, and Jamie in Karanga Happy Road. Thank you all for joining us, everybody. We have another one of these next Thursday at 10:30 with candidate Craig Lord, and all of them are available online. We've put them on the front page of the Newmarket website now, newmarket.co.nz, and look for the Battle for Auckland tile and click through and watch at your leisure. But Efeso, thank you so much. Manuwe Tele Lava, and again, Manuwe Leave Astu Whanau. Happy birthday, enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks everyone, take care.
Thanks, Mark.